Someone gives you 10 compliments in a week. You barely remember any of them by Friday. Someone gives you one sharp insult on Tuesday. You are still replaying it in your head 3 weeks later, word for word, tone for tone. This is not because you are insecure or too sensitive or focused on the wrong things. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do, and it was never built to treat praise and criticism as equal information. Think about the last performance review you received, or the last time a friend gave you feedback on something you made. If the feedback included 9 positive comments and 1 piece of criticism, which part of that conversation replays in your mind days later? For almost everyone, it is the criticism. Not because it was more true, not because it was more useful, but because your brain has a deeply asymmetric filing system, and negative information gets a permanent high-priority file, while positive information often gets tossed into a folder that quietly empties itself over time. To understand why, you need to understand a concept researched extensively by psychologist Roy Baumeister, who in a landmark 2001 review paper argued that bad is stronger than good across nearly every domain of human experience. Baumeister and his colleagues examined evidence spanning memory, emotion, relationships, and decision-making, and found a consistent pattern. Negative events, negative feedback, and negative interactions produce stronger, faster, and more durable psychological effects than positive ones of equal intensity. A single betrayal weighs more than several acts of loyalty. One harsh criticism outweighs multiple compliments. Baumeister's review concluded that this asymmetry is not a personality flaw or a sign of pessimism. It is a general property of how human psychology processes information, present across cultures and consistent throughout the research literature. The reason this asymmetry exists traces back to survival. Missing a single piece of good news rarely threatens your life. Missing a single piece of bad news, a predator nearby, a spoiled food source, a betrayal within your group could end it. Evolution therefore built a brain that treats negative information as inherently higher priority, because throughout almost all of human history, underreacting to danger was far more costly than overreacting to safety. Your brain did not evolve to make you happy. It evolved to keep you alive, and alive brains that overweighted threats survived more often than brains that weighted threats and rewards equally. This is the deep dive that explains exactly what is happening at the neural level. Neuroscientist John Cacioppo, who studied this asymmetry using electrical brain activity, found that when people are shown positive, negative, and neutral images, the brain's electrical response to negative stimuli is measurably larger and faster than its response to equally intense positive stimuli. Cacioppo called this the negativity bias, and his research demonstrated that this is not something you consciously choose. It happens automatically in the brain's evaluative system, often within a fraction of a second, before you have any chance to interpret or reason about what you just experienced. Your brain's not treating the insult as more important because you decided it mattered more. It is treating it as more important because the underlying neural architecture is quite literally wired to react more strongly to threat-shaped information than to reward-shaped information, regardless of the actual stakes involved. This connects directly to a specific and well-documented finding about memory itself, studied extensively by neuroscientist Elizabeth Kensinger. Kensinger's research demonstrated that emotionally negative experiences are encoded into memory with greater detail and higher durability than emotionally positive or neutral experiences of similar significance. Her work found that this effect is particularly pronounced for the central, most emotionally charged details of an event, while peripheral details tend to fade regardless of emotional tone. This explains why you can often recall the exact words, the exact tone of voice, even the exact facial expression of someone who insulted or criticized you, while the details of a compliment you received around the same time blurred together or disappear entirely. Your memory system is not failing to preserve the compliment. It is succeeding at doing exactly what it evolved to do, prioritizing information your ancestors' survival depended on remembering vividly. Here is the counterintuitive twist that makes this even harder to notice while it's happening. Because negative information gets processed faster and stored more durably, it also tends to feel more accurate and more informative than it actually is, simply because of how strongly your brain reacted to it. A single critical comment in a sea of positive feedback can feel like the truest, most important signal in the entire interaction, not because it carries more actual evidence about your worth or competence, but because your brain's negativity bias makes it feel disproportionately significant compared to everything positive surrounding it. This is why one negative comment on an otherwise successful project can dominate your emotional experience of the entire outcome, even when the actual ratio of positive to negative feedback overwhelmingly favors the positive. So, what does this mean for how you interpret feedback, criticism, and your own memory of social interactions going forward? It means the intensity of your emotional reaction to something negative is not a reliable measure of how important or accurate that information actually is. Your brain is running an ancient threat detection default that treats negative input as disproportionately significant, regardless of the actual ratio of positive to negative signal present in reality. This does not mean you should ignore criticism entirely. Some of it is genuinely useful and worth acting on, but it does mean the emotional weight a criticism carries should never be mistaken for evidence of its actual importance. The practical shift here involves deliberately correcting for a bias your brain will not correct for on its own. When you receive mixed feedback, actively counting the ratio of positive to negative comments, rather than relying on your gut sense of what stood out most, gives you a more accurate picture than your emotional memory alone ever will. When a single criticism keeps replaying in your mind days or weeks later, asking whether it is replaying because it is genuinely important or simply because your negativity bias has flagged it as high priority regardless of its actual weight, helps interrupt the automatic amplification. And deliberately revisiting specific positive feedback in writing, rather than trusting your memory to retain it, compensates for a memory system that was never built to preserve praise with the same intensity it reserves for criticism. Someone gives you 10 compliments in a week, and you barely remember any of them by Friday. Someone gives you one sharp insult, and you replay it for weeks. This was never a flaw in your character. It is an ancient survival mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do. Treating danger as more urgent than safety, even when the danger is nothing more than a single unkind word in an otherwise kind week. Now you know why.